You're listening to the Northern Hunter Podcast, home of all things hunting, fishing, and outdoors in Alaska. All right, everybody, welcome into the show. I'm your host, James Payne, and I'm joined here with my co-host, Dalton Gray.
How are you doing, James?
Amazing. And Mariah Humphreys.
Hello.
All right, guys, hang in there. We have a pretty interesting episode for you guys. We're going to kind of play off last week's episode with the regs and go into more specific stuff for you species-specific hunters. We're going to go into the regs on moose and sheep and caribou and all that. So if you're targeting a specific animal this year, hang in for that. But I believe Dalton has a interesting story he brought to the table today.
Yeah, in last week's episode, I received a text mid-recording from an individual that sent me a screenshot of the state troopers' Facebook, and there was an article. I guess not an article, but a quick summary about an incident that caught my attention. And a few days later, the New York Times had a story out about it that gave a little bit better detail. Normally, I don't read the Times personally.
Right, yeah.
It's not my first, not my source for news for anything, but they happen to cover this story that I found pretty interesting. So the title reads, and it's pretty self-explanatory. We don't have to read it if we didn't want to, but we will. It says, skull found in Alaska is linked to New York man missing since 1976. Ooh. So the brief synopsis of the story is that there were two brothers in 1976 that traveled to Alaska, and they were going to walk the Porcupine River out east.
And where is that?
I read somewhere that it was about, where the remains were found was about 8 miles from the Canadian border.
Okay.
So this took place way out east.
Yep.
So the individual, Gary Southerden, and his brother were on a walkabout, if you will. Mm-hmm. That doesn't say that they were hunting, but they were dropped off by an aircraft, I believe, and they were just going to walk the river and just meet up at the end. And then when the river froze up, their time was going to be up for their trip, and they were going to get extracted. So that's pretty interesting.
That is an interesting way to go about it.
I guess Gary, the individual from the story here, had worked on the pipeline in '72 when he moved up here. Okay, and he enjoyed being outside, and his brother made it to the pickup point, and Gary never showed up.
Oh, that's just north of Chilketuk.
Never quite made it to the rendezvous point, and so they initiated a search. And from the air, and then from the ground, they said that they hired a mountain guide, and they found his brother's site. They found broken glasses, and he found an identification, but they never found the individual.
Okay,
so. It says here in the article that his family assumed that his brother had died around the age of 25 because of severe weather in the area. The family put a tombstone in the family cemetery plot engraved with his name, and it read, "Lost in Alaska in the 1970s."
Wow.
And then they included a photo of Gary Southerden. He looks like a mountain man type. That is
sure
for sure.
Does.
Bearded individual with long hair. He looks like something right out of the 70s, all right.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Does it go into any detail on how long their journey was supposed to be? Like from where they got dropped off to where they were planning on being?
I don't believe that it actually says how long the trip was.
Man.
Yeah, but so in 1997, someone found a skull in that area.
Okay.
And reported it to the troopers. And what's unclear to me is whether or not anyone tried to recover the remains in 1997 when this was found. That is kind of uncertain, at least what I can gather from the article. But this last year, December of 22, the troopers were able to use DNA, and I believe they recovered, some partial remains and whatnot, and they were able to match genetically.
Wow.
To this individual that had went missing all these years ago.
Man, modern science is wild.
And he just went on a walk down the river. I assume they were doing some hunting. I would assume he had a gun. But the thing that really caught my attention was that they believe the cause of death was a bear mauling.
That would make sense.
Really?
So,
Was there marks on the skull, or did it say?
It does not
Doesn't
say.
go into detail.
Yeah, it says the troopers did not elaborate on any detail for cause of death.
and what's astounding to me, and for the people listening, like, there's multiple stories of people doing treks like this. When you were telling that story, one thing that came to mind is a little documentary style film that my wife and I watched. It was probably a couple months ago now, but it's called Arctic Daughter: A Lifetime in the Wilderness. And it's about this lady and her then fiance that, again, around that time period of the early 70s, they came up here as, I think, young 20s or something like that, and jumped in a canoe on the Yukon, loaded down with all their gear, rowed out, or, floated out, rode the river as far as they could go, until they basically ran out of space to go. They had nothing but paper maps. And then they built a cabin, and they hunted moose, and they just survived the winter. And this is way before the day of
Was there
inReaches.
names? Was there names or anything?
I can look it up real quick.
Was his name mentioned?
Sounds
like somebody I know.
You said they disappeared?
Gene Aspen and Tom Irons were the two in that. And so no, they went out there.
Because I know a guy that got out of Vietnam.
Yeah. No, these were like youngins.
I mean, he was not that old, but canoed the Yukon, hauled his canoe across the few hills and mountains, and built a cabin out in the middle of nowhere and lived there for several years.
Yeah, no, these people they're old now. She's narrating the whole film.
Oh, okay.
But
I see.
But just like it seems like that was like a time when people just went out and did that, and like the idea of nobody knows if you're okay. You're floating down the river in a canoe, or you're walking down the river, getting dropped off by an airplane. Back in the day, I mean, there was no check-in system really, and so it's like, that's an interesting thing that you hear several stories like that.
There's part of me that wishes it was still like that.
Right. Yeah. Kind of more true wilderness, and they kind of talk about that in the film as well. Like when all the planes started coming in and everything, but that's that's for another time.
I know for a while there on social media. Now you can't believe everything you read on the internet, surprisingly enough. But there was a photo going around. I have it on my phone somewhere, but it was some old timer. It was an old photo from the 80s or 90s, I would assume. And he was sitting on the ground, I think, or maybe even kneeling down. And on the ground in the foreground of the photo was a human skull, a moose head in the background, and then I believe a bear skull and part of a spinal column from something there. And, just bones everywhere. And, the story that was attached to it was something to the effect of moose hunter mauled to death by bear, but manages to kill the bear in the process, something like that. And if I remember right, a lot of it was discredited, and it was, an internet hype photo that was totally out of context. But that being said, it wasn't that uncommon for things like that to happen. There were no inReaches, that Garmin wasn't around.
Yeah.
Phones were still attached to wires on the walls of buildings, and there was no mobile communication.
I remember when that was a thing. So
well, me too. Growing up in a third world country, I remember as a young kid, my dad's first cellular phone was just about the size of our laptops now.
Yeah.
It seems ridiculous, but anyway, I mean, communication has come a long ways, and it seems like we are soft. We like to poke fun at modern outdoorsmen and kind of act like we're wimps. But guess what? These guys would have done all the same thing. Had they had access to GPSs and digital maps and GPS communication, right? Or, I'm sorry, satellite communication, they would have used it. It's just an adaptation of technology and progress, but all good things when used in the right way.
It is, yeah. It's a whole nother mindset when you're out there, and that if you don't show up at your point,
right,
there is no chance they're ever finding you.
Yeah.
There's no panic button on your inReach. There's no anything, they know you dropped off at this point of the river, and you were supposed to show up at this point of the river.
Right.
And all they can do is fly a plane over that.
Right.
And I feel for the families. I mean, back then too. I mean, with this guy, I mean, I'm glad they got some closure, and the fact that modern science can just figure that out through all of that.
Almost 50 years later.
You find some remains from 50 years ago.
He's not first, and he probably won't be the last.
Oh no, I'm sure. I think they say what is the figure? 2,400 people go missing in Alaska every year or something like that. It's crazy.
Whoa.
It's crazy high. It's like
Now?
a stupid, or maybe I'm thinking 240 people. I don't know.
Whoa.
But it's a crazy
say,
high number of people that go missing.
2,400.
See, even
wow,
200
That does,
That's
yeah,
crazy.
as soon as I said it, that sounded wrong. But
Even 240 is a lot.
yeah, it was a much higher number than I expected. I'll find a figure at some point. But
well, I mean, the perfect case is this guy. This is an ongoing thing up in the Brooks Range on the north side, out on the slope there.
Oh yeah,
that guy that went missing last fall.
Yeah,
that
there haven't been any new developments on that, has there?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
No, I was made aware of a search team that has organized. From what I was told, now I haven't read anything about it specifically myself, but I was told that there was a team that was taking sonar out on sleds out to this lake where they suspect this guy was going to be, and they wondered if he hadn't, drowned in the lake or something, and something to that effect.
Did they say what the biggest theory right now is?
No,
because I know there was 4 different theories flying around all over.
I've heard a bunch of different rumors, but nothing that I
think they ruled out foul play. They ruled out anything like that. So
right.
But so even with all the technology, it can still happen, man.
I think the last thing I had heard was that the biggest suspicion was that he had tried to cross a river or go into some water somewhere that was overflowing and too fast and swept him downstream, and just a drowning situation. Which last year up there was a very, very wet year. Yeah, it was very dangerous in a lot of places, and he's not the only person that would have encountered that. But that's something where if you're on your own, you have to take extra precautions about that if you're by yourself, because there's nobody to jump in after you and try to save you. Right. If you go downriver. So, and even then, if you're hunting with a buddy, if you go downriver and he can't get to you fast enough, you can drown pretty quick. Especially it doesn't take you very long to take in enough water to drown.
For the listeners that aren't from Alaska and don't get the inherent training we get just living here. Yeah. Not a lot of the smaller rivers, but if you end up getting swept into any of these bigger rivers, the silt that is in this water up here,
the silt and the temperature of the water
weigh you down
if
like
you're not
crazy.
Prepared mentally when that that cold water hits you to immediately start moving. Yeah. And the cold just saps the energy from your body, even if you are trying to move. I mean,
and it's amazing when you get to some of these streams that are out there, and you're looking at where they converge into the big river. There's a literal wall of silt right across there.
Yeah, you can see it,
and it's crazy cool to see.
That's where all the big fish are, man.
Yeah. Well, kind of on the topic. I think we said we weren't going to touch on this, but I kind of want to a little bit. Is we got an email from an avid listener, a buddy of you guys's, and
I don't know him, Dalton.
A buddy of Dalton's, and
Mr. Thomas,
and he brought up a couple of items that he uses as essential items from a previous episode of ours, and all great things to read and to listen to hear, and we love getting feedback from all of our episodes. So if you have any suggestions or any gear lists that you have, definitely send it our way. We love reading that stuff. But he did say one thing and suggested one thing that I do want to talk about, just why I didn't talk about it and kind of why I wouldn't recommend it to people, is alternatives to satellite communication, kind of like we were just talking about. We recommended the Garmin InReach when you're hunting in the backcountry, and I believe that's what all 3 of us use. I think we don't deviate from that a whole lot. It's a subscription based product. Now there are multiple other services that you can subscribe to that'll get you satellite communication out in the woods. There's the most prominent one I know of is Zoleo. That's the one that was suggested, and there's what are those other ones? Iridium Go,
Spot,
other stuff, Spot, and some of these are on different satellite networks than others, and so when you look at them on their website or you look at their ads, they might advertise better coverage in certain areas, but there's one particular reason why I would not recommend those to people, is because the Garmin InReach is a standalone device. You can Bluetooth your phone to it, but without any other device other than the Garmin InReach, you are able to call for help, text your wife, text your boss, check your maps, do whatever you've got to do, and have that communication, that backup system there in case you need it. If something happens, your wheeler breaks down, you get hurt, you just need to check in, you can do that. Yeah. There is a Bluetooth app that comes with that where you can text just like you would on a normal cell phone. All great things. I really, really stress the importance of redundancy in systems. And that's what's lacking with a lot of these other systems is you're typically going to be given a box of some sort, a device box that just looks like a black, almost like you could almost say it looks like your standard like wireless phone charger almost. It's just a little block with,
it's got a few buttons
with a few buttons and everything and a power button and whatnot. And the only way you're able to utilize that device in order to text or call for help or anything is by using an external cell phone to Bluetooth into it.
It has an SOS button on it.
It does, but you're not going to be able to now. And some of these are going to have even additional features to the inReach, whereas like some of them you can even get like data and stuff like that. But you got to weigh what's important. And to me, having a redundancy system, if my phone dies and I wasn't planning on it, let's say I'm on my maps a lot more than I planned on, which I have the brand new iPhone, so it shouldn't kill my battery in one day, but still, or let's say I fall down, I slip on a rock and, end up landing on the pocket that has my phone in it and shattering the screen. Mm-hmm. I can still use my inReach as a standalone device.
Right.
If something happens to the screen of my inReach, but it's still functional, I can utilize my phone.
Yep.
That's a very important thing.
Is. I agree.
And I just wanted to point out that's why I didn't bring those up as recommended options.
The distinct advantage specifically to Zoleo, because I was looking it up a little bit, but Zoleo itself, the battery runtime on that, even in active use, is insane compared to an inReach.
Yeah.
That being said, I agree with everything you had to say. That is pretty much the only advantage I think it has. It might be lighter and smaller.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably comparable to the Mini, honestly.
It may be. I've never held one in my hands. I don't know for sure. There's a lot of great products out there. Spot doesn't have as good of a connection. That's what I've heard is they're a little harder to keep connected.
So Spot does not have the satellite coverage of Alaska specifically that Garmin with Iridium
they don't use
does.
The Iridium system.
Correct. So, I know someone that had a Spot messenger for a while and it just didn't work very well at all. The coverage was just terrible.
One thing I really like about Spot, talking about standalone devices, if it wasn't for that, I probably would have one right now because he told me about that when he had one. But I was looking at when it come out and it was the new Spot X, I think it was called.
It had a full
keypad.
Yeah.
When you talk about standalone, it operates, it's a little bigger, but you don't need your phone. You don't even need to get your phone out the tech because you can just tap, 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 tap and
right.
Or click, 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 however it was. But
well, and
but if it doesn't connect very well, then
and to be fair, in the spirit of redundancy, if you want to go really over the top, you could look at one of these devices for just camp.
Right.
If you had a big camp set up, let's say you have a cabin somewhere, you're not backpack mountain hunting, you're going in on a wheeler, you're able to carry a little bit of extra weight. You could bring an alternative satellite connection that maybe doesn't have the best battery life, but it has a better connection, or maybe doesn't have.
If you're an inReach Montana guy and you don't mind weight, but you love your big touchscreen Montana, with the inReach in it, great big huge screen. Which, granted, I love that. If I'm using it for GPS, I would love a 7-inch screen. But the battery life is 2 days. But if you're already not caring about weight too much, especially if you got the money to do it and you're on an ATV or something, get your Garmin Montana and get yourself a Zoleo so you have the battery life there as a backup or something, maybe, or maybe get a Garmin Montana to use as your GPS and then use your Zoleo for texting, however you want to do it. But
the point is there's multiple different ways to configure these things, but I think the Garmin inReach fits the bill for backcountry best. And that's the one I'm going to recommend. I'm aware of the other ones. I just so just for anyone listening that knows I didn't say them.
I've heard of a lot of good stuff. I've been wanting to do more research, but that's my biggest thing. The only two companies I've seen give you a screen is Garmin and Spot.
Yep.
And another company gives us a screen. Well, then I'll absolutely be willing to buy it and review it and see how it does. But
yeah, for sure.
Did you? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to mention, Garmin just came out with a screenless option as well.
Yeah, well, it's got a little display on it, though.
Does
Tiny,
it?
very small display. I was looking at that. I was actually looking at that when we were talking about it.
Can you text from that directly?
I want to take a look at that.
I believe the Zoleo has preset abilities, but
I think you're right on
I'm
that.
not 100% sure. As far as the coverage goes and the functionality of it, the Zoleo option is a good one if you are confident that your phone is going to work the whole time.
Yeah.
But I'm always paranoid. What if I fall in the water and my phone gets swamped and it quits working? Well, now I can only send preset messages. So for me, I'm in the same boat. I like having redundancy. I like the fact that on my Garmin Explorer Plus, I have built-in topo maps.
Yep.
I have built-in text ability standalone on that unit.
Yep.
It's not the easiest thing to text with all the time directly from the unit, but it's better than nothing at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it's better than the InReach Mini 2, which you have to scroll up and down analog style through the alphabet, which is a complete pain in the neck. But
so I know this has preset messages. You can read messages on it. It looks like you definitely obviously can Bluetooth your phone to it.
And this is the Garmin, which one?
This is the Garmin InReach Messenger.
So this is just a very tiny, couple inch square with a little analog screen on the bottom of it. I'm sorry.
No, it's a little LCD screen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. LCD screen. And it just primarily functions.
Actually, does that have an SOS
I'm going to correct myself on that. That's an LED screen.
Okay.
Like big.
That's why you're the tech guy. Does that have an SOS button?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe it does. I believe it's under that.
Oh, okay.
Or under, it's under a flap. Like.
Yeah.
Right there.
Right there.
Labeled.
Okay. But yeah, so that has been the trend as more people are more reliant on their cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
And I from the selling standpoint, it's not a bad idea just because, everybody is using their cell phones in connection with their InReaches now. And that's a great thing. And it's really handy until it's not, until you have to rely on not having a cell phone in the field until you get back out. You got to be able to communicate with that device. So, yeah, personally, I think the Zoleo is a very functional thing if you're willing to put all that faith in not losing your phone.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and like most other, there's a lot of great options out there.
A lot of it's just personal preference.
Yep.
I would love to see
in the personal situation you're going to be in. Are you trying to save as many ounces as possible, or can you carry a brick with a 7-inch screen?
Yeah.
It depends on what you're going to be doing with it. Are you going to have power there? Are you going somewhere with a generator?
Does Garmin make an InReach watch
yet?
They
do not. I was just looking at that. They make GPS watches.
Yeah.
They make probably, I would argue, some of the absolute best in the market for GPS watches.
I'm sure that's coming to have an InReach watch someday.
I imagine it's going to come someday. I think the biggest thing is getting the antenna in there, the amount of space you need to get a good satellite antenna. Obviously, they are GPS watches.
Yep.
So you can do the tracking and the maps and everything on them.
Yeah.
But I mean, my Samsung Watch Pro that I'm wearing right now has a lot of features too.
I was going to say all of our phones have GPS antennas in them. So
yeah.
Right, but it can't message her.
Right.
Although that might be coming,
that's not true. The new iPhone 14 does. So the new iPhone 14 has an SOS messenger system built into it.
But it's an SOS. It's an SOS.
Yeah. I don't think you can use it
messaging.
For texting your wife saying you made it somewhere. But if you do get into trouble, they have an SOS button that you can hit with the new 14s. I don't think the 13s have that.
Yeah, I believe that.
That'll work outside of service?
It will.
Yes.
Yeah. And actually somebody, I believe it was down near Ketchikan, was able to use it and actually successfully got rescued using just their iPhone.
No kidding.
I believe.
So talk about redundancy. That's triple redundancy.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That has been a feature in a lot of older Android phones. I don't know if it still is. I've seen it. It looked like it was a feature. I haven't really done the research.
Yeah.
No offense to all you Apple people out there, but Apple's usually behind the times when it comes to features and phones. So
yeah, it's
because they're trying to get all of our technology from China for Apple.
Send me a grainy picture about it.
Yeah. That's one of the most annoying things about Android is how they can't seem to text. That's the only thing, honestly.
Anyway, we're going to jump off the technology ship here.
Wow.
Yeah. I was thinking about bringing up something else.
Shot to the heart. Oh my! Wow! All right, so we're a hunting podcast.
Hey, this all relates to hunting.
It does. It does. It all circles around.
And I'm sure there's somebody like me listening who's loving it and wishes he could give his own opinion.
Right. Well, if you have an opinion, write us at thenorthernhunter.com.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Write us an email and tell us that you like Mariah too.
Yeah.
All right, folks, I want to take a second to tell you about a product I found this last year and have absolutely fallen in love with. It's the Stealthy Hunter rifle cover. I used one on a recent black-tailed deer hunt in southeast Alaska, and it did a great job of keeping the saltwater and debris out of the action and also protecting the scope on my rifle from getting knocked around and damaged. On top of all that, the carry handle made it easy to transport the rifle to and from the boat during the hunt. When it got wet from rain and ocean spray, I hung it up at camp to dry at night, and it was always dry in 20 minutes or less. Stealthy Hunter also offers a wide variety of nutritional supplements for the outdoorsman, such as CBD oils, essential vitamins, turmeric, and bone broth. In the gear shop, they also have a lightweight first aid kit, glassing pads, and stuff sacks to organize your gear and your pack. Go check out Stealthy Hunter's website and use the code TheNorthernHunter at checkout to get a discount on your order today. All Stealthy Hunter equipment is proudly made in the USA.
Everybody knows that one of the most important pieces of a hunter's kit is their knife. Whether you're looking for a fleshing blade, a skinning blade, or just a quality, multi-purpose knife for the backcountry, Yukon River Knives has what you need. They offer blades such as the Hunter, Small Game, and the Sendero Bush Knife. Yukon River Knives is based in Texas and has a unique mission goal in that a percentage of all knife sales go to support a missionary in Alaska. Now, Dalton, you've experience with these knives in the field. Talk to us about that.
As a matter of fact, I have used a few of their knives and watched my good friend Remy use them for years with great results. They have a micarta handle that doesn't get slippery when it gets wet, and they have phenomenal edge retention for long skinning jobs. Go check out our web link on thenorthernhunter.com, and that'll take you directly to Yukon River Knives website to see their full selection and order your knives for your next hunt with the discount code TheNorthernHunter at checkout. And remember, nothing replaces a quality hunting knife.
Hey guys, if you've listened to the show for any amount of time, you've likely heard Dalton and I go back and forth about bullet construction and how I like rapid expanding bonded core bullets that leave massive wound channels. I've also stated I would never use a monolithic bullet. Well, I'm here to tell you about the company that finally changed my mind. Hammer Bullets produces what I would consider the most premium and best working monolithic bullets on the market today. These bullets are designed so that after penetrating the hide of an animal, the front half of the bullet explodes, shedding its petals and imparting massive damage to the vital areas while retaining the rear shank for maximum penetration, effectively closing the gap between lead core and monolithic construction. The guys at Hammer designed these bullets with 100% focus on how they perform once they reach their destination. But don't let that fool you. These bullets have amazing VCs and have specialized pressure grooves built in for amazing inherent accuracy. They have a minimum velocity rating of 1,800 feet per second, which allows for long-range shots but have no maximum velocity, making them perfect for every cartridge from your granddaddy's old 30-30 to the high-velocity rounds like the Weatherby 3378 without having to worry about your bullet failing. They've also recently partnered with Weatherby to provide factory ammunition for a multitude of cartridges. To view their expansive selection and find the perfect match for your hunting needs, go to hammerbullets.com to buy yours today and drop the hammer on your next adventure. All right, people. Well, we're going to jump into our main topic here. That was a fun discussion. But so what we're going to be talking about today is specific animals, specific species, and the more specific regulations to hunting either of those. Whatever you might need to understand in order to not get in trouble when you're going after one of these animals. Right.
And so just for a refresher, in our last episode, which was what, 13?
13,
yep. Episode 13, we discussed kind of a general 30,000 foot view of Alaska's big game hunting regulations.
Yep.
And in the effort of simplicity, you and I both felt like we could really go farther and explain more things that we feel are more important about it.
Yep.
Breaking down how to read the regs is important, yes. But if you already live up here and you already know how to read the regs book, episode 13 is really not for you. Now, go listen to it, but you will probably realize that that's not really what you're looking for. So this one is more specific to individual species regulations and the legality of different, judging methods and, Anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, and really it's going to kind of lead right into from, what you were talking about with, how to plan your hunt through the regulations when you're looking at the book here.
Mm-hmm.
And, we'd talked about figuring out what you want to go after, figuring out where you want to hunt, looking at the regulations, making sure that you know which unit you're going to be in, subunit, anything like that. I'm going to take it to the next bar over on the regs, which is, it doesn't actually have a label on it. It's just included in the bag limit and special instructions section of your regulation book.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you're looking at that, what we were talking about in the last section or the last episode with you'll see the breakdown of your subunits or your specific areas you're going to be in is obviously it's going to be talking about moose. That's going to be the big header on top, or sheep or goats, whatever you're going after. And so besides or next to the section that says, let's say 20A, 20B, 20C, where it gives you the area you're going to be hunting in, directly next to that is a section that's specifically for the animal that you're going after and the rules on what you're allowed to take and what you're not allowed to take.
Real quick, if you're out of state and you want to follow along, look at this, you're in hunting up here. I mentioned this in the last podcast, but if you want to look at this later or while we're talking about it, if you get on Google or any search engine and type in ADFG, Alaska Department of Fish and Game is what that stands for. But ADFG regulations, it's like usually the first thing that comes up, and you can click on and get the whole PDF, or which part of the state you're going to be in also drops down there. But that's where we're at, and then we're looking right now at Unit 20.
Yep.
For our examples.
What page is that?
We're on page 110 right now.
110, and again, this is just the unit we live in, so it's one that's familiar.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
we don't have to give away any hunting spots with this unit.
Right.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
If we talk about
the unit safe one.
If we talk about the unit that we live in, then that's probably not the one that we're hunting in. So
details, man, details.
Here we go.
But yeah, so we'll kick this one off talking about the mighty North American ungulate.
Correct.
The Yukon moose, which is the one we have.
Is that
here.
The largest member of the deer species?
I want to say it is. I want to say it's the largest ungulate in the the Northern American area.
Yeah.
So now there are several different species of moose throughout the country, but we're talking specifically about the ones in Alaska, so those don't matter.
So you're talking about the Yukon moose.
The Yukon moose, biggest of the bunch. So that's pretty much all you're going to find up here. You're not going to find any of the Shiras or anything like that.
Shiras.
Is it Shiras?
Yeah.
Man, I've been reading that wrong for 32 years now.
Shiras moose. Sounds like a really old Italian lady that owns moose. You can't shoot that one. That's Shiras moose.
Shiras moose.
Nice. Is there any other kinds of moose in the world?
Shiras moose.
There's, I want to say 4 different kinds, but I only pay attention
I know
to the
they
Alaska
have moose
one.
in Newfoundland, in that part of the world.
Yeah. Do you know they call them elk out in out across the ocean there?
Yeah, I've heard something about that.
Newfoundland's not across the ocean, but still.
We gained freedom from that a long time ago.
Right.
Nice.
Then they have moose in Quebec, Labrador, right?
Oh, all over, yeah.
Eastern Canada.
All over Canada.
But I thought they called it something different, though. Maybe not.
It is a different species of moose or subspecies, whatever you want to call that.
Sorry to confuse
I'm not the scientist
here.
I'm not a biologist.
Anyway, but we're talking about Yukon moose.
We're talking about Yukon moose. This is the only kind you're going to find in Alaska. So
the biggest ones.
If you're looking at moose regs in Alaska, these are what they're talking about. And
yes.
But anyway, so when you get into the regulations and you see, let's just say I'm looking at 20A right now, 20A remainder, right? It talks about the fairy trail management area. This is outside of that. You're going to see a section that says one bull with spike fork or 50-inch antlers or antlers 3 or more brow tines at least on one side.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important because a lot of people don't pick up on that very last part of that sentence. And I've heard many people say or argue the fact of whether one is a legal bull or not based on whether it has one on both sides. Now you're going to see in each area, it's going to be a little bit different. Some are 4 brow tines. The best explanation I got on that is that it has more to do with the genetics in the area than anything else. It's not an age thing. It's just that certain moose in certain areas don't ever get 4 brow tines, really. The genetics in that specific location don't support a 4th brow tine on majority of moose.
I do not like 4 brow tine limitations.
You don't?
Let's just say I've hunted a lot of areas where there's a 4 brow tine limitation, but I've never seen a moose with more than 2.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
There's a lot of theory about whether or not a 4 brow tine bull regulation is just allowing you to shoot those genetics out of the herd.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
I have heard that argument.
Which is, I don't know. I have heard biologists refute it and refute it well.
Yeah.
But, there are a lot of people that are discontented with that regulation that's been in place for so long.
The way it was explained to me is that within 20 years or 30 years, most 4 brow tine places turn into 3 brow tine places. And then, it kind of works its way.
Well, the place I was like that. Be a 3 brow tine place.
Yeah. But to get into the breakdown of this, what this is designed to do is to kind of leave that prime breeding age group alone to where you can't take those out.
Right.
These are regulations you're going to see primarily in areas that could have overpressured hunting if given the opportunity. And maybe the moose population of that area couldn't support the amount of pressure that this area could get. And so what they do is, for those of you that aren't familiar with moose, maybe you're looking at coming up for your first moose hunt, or you just happen to always see big ones. The young ones only have spikes on them. They don't have any tines. They don't have any paddles. They don't just naturally grow that paddle that very first year.
Yeah.
They look, it's like just like a little deer. It's just like a little whitetail won't have any tines on it. It just has a spike. And moose do the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You are legally allowed to shoot those in even these restricted areas. So you're basically limited up to like that 2nd year when they're getting kicked out, 3rd year when they're starting to develop that spike. And then after that, once they actually develop a paddle, then they're protected under this regulation.
Can I elaborate on the spike fork?
Yeah,
specific part.
That's what we're here to do.
Okay. Yep. So the specific regulation here says with a spike fork or 50 inch. Now there's different. So most of the time when you see spike fork, if it says with spike fork, there's one that I think is a little bit different than that.
Okay.
When it comes to smaller bulls, but when it says spike fork, that the exact meaning of that is that is on one side. That is not on both sides.
Yep.
Okay. You could have a bull paddled out on one side, and if it has a spike or a fork on the other side, it is still a legal bull under the spike fork rule. So
you like 25-inch paddle on one side.
Yeah. Can we pull up at the beginning of the regs where it specifies?
I was thinking about that.
Yeah, I would suggest that.
But yeah, so yeah,
let's
it's
go ahead
basically
and scroll back up there and look at that really quick.
Now, while they're looking that up, the next section of that is 50-inch.
Mm-hmm.
That is a measurement of width.
At the widest point of the antlers.
Widest point from end to end, left to right, as the horn or as the antlers are measured.
Yes, thank you. That is an antler on a moose, not
I corrected
a horn.
myself. Now, where people run into issues with this is not all moose paddles look the same.
Mm-hmm.
You have some that do grow kind of flat and wide, and then you have others that grow back. If you're looking at a moose and it doesn't look 50 wide, it doesn't matter if those paddles go all the way back to the middle of its spine.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be 50 inches wide.
Right.
And we'll go into ways on how to judge that here in a moment, but it looks like we found what we're looking for.
So on page 31 of the Alaska Fish and Game regs, it says legal bull moose in areas with a spike fork restriction. And it goes on to say a spike fork bull is legal if it has one antler on either side that is a spike, which is 1 point, or a fork, which is 2 points. The antler on the other side can be any configuration. Male calves are not considered spike bulls. Bulls with palmated antlers or paddles seldom are legal under the spike or fork requirement. A spike bull is legal if it has one antler on either side that is a spike, 1 point. The antler on the other side can be any configuration. Bulls with palmated antlers or paddles seldom are legal under the spike requirement.
Okay, so there you have it. So that's what I was talking about, different designations. That's spike fork or spike I believe like in the Fairbanks management area, I think it has to be a spike.
Okay.
Or greater.
And again, that falls back to knowing where you are, what the rules are in your particular area, and then understanding, and this is a great example. What we're doing right now while recording this podcast is looking at the regs, seeing these things, figuring out what exactly they mean by the specific word. When I was talking about in the last episode that Alaska has some of the best hunting regulations ever written, I wasn't exaggerating. I mean, they lay out everything. There's pictures, there's diagrams, there's everything you'd ever need to know.
Yeah. So now, one more thing I wanted to read that I just noticed here that is a really good point to make. Some male calves have a small amount of antler growth covered with hair and skin. These are still calves and are not legal in a spike fork, or antlered bull hunt. Male calves are only legal in antlerless, any moose, or any bull hunts that do not specifically prohibit the taking of calves. So just as a clarity, if you see a big calf that has little tiny nubs sticking out, that does not qualify as a spike bull.
That are covered though, correct?
Correct.
Because I believe the regulation for the next section we're going to talk about, which is the any bull area, is I think it's a 1-inch nub, I want to say.
Okay, so I was going to cover that.
Right here. So that's right here. Yeah. This is on page 30.
We'll hold on just a second on that. Now, when you're looking at go ahead.
Well, this goes into the spike fork designation.
Okay, yeah.
Because a lot of times you'll have the start of a brow tine down close to the head of a moose. And a lot of times you'll look at it and you'll say, that's definitely only 2 points, right? And then you'll shoot it and you'll walk up to it and you'll be like, great, there's a third little nub either next to the fork or down by the head that you just didn't see from.
And this also applies to what you were just going to mention with brow tines too.
Yeah.
So
sure.
A point or tine, this is from the regs on page 30. It says a point or tine is an antler projection at least 1 inch long and longer than it is wide, with the width measured 1 inch or more from the tip. An antlered point or tine originating within 2 inches from the base and less than 3 inches in length will not be counted as a brow tine or point. So if it's within 2 inches from the base and less than 3 inches in length, it will not be counted as a brow tine or point. And I believe they make that distinction because that's something that can be very hard to see even at a close distance, especially in a low light condition, which is when a lot of times you're looking at shooting an animal, especially a moose in the fall.
And I'm going to say, as a meat hunter primarily, when I see a spike, I'm just as happy, walking out, because that means it's going to be tender for one.
It's going to be tender?
But I will say, I took a spike bull, this is a couple years ago now, and I watched that bull just as carefully as I would trying to measure out 50 inches or looking for brow tines, because in this particular instance, it was standing perfectly broadside. I could have shot it at any moment, but because of that, its spike was just about the same length as its ear. And I couldn't quite make out, again, in the waning light, and this was actually first thing in the morning, first light. I couldn't quite make that out, and I had to wait for that particular moment when it just turned its head perfectly, and I could see the spike on one side and its ear right next to it with a little bit of green grass in between. And so it is good. You should be very vigilant whether you're going after a spike or a big bull.
That's right.
Yeah.
So with that, we should talk about the next restriction. So we covered width, we covered spike fork regulation, and Mariah specified that in some areas it could be legal to shoot a spike, but not a fork, or vice versa.
Yep.
I haven't encountered that in the regs. Personally, we would have to find a unit where that would apply.
Specifically in
we should try to find
the Fairbanks management area,
a unit,
which is in 20B, which is again where we live.
We should try to look at that and see if there's a distinction between spike and spike
fork. I believe
fork.
the spike is usually not used as a distinction for
that's
a maximum.
That's 18.
Oh, 18. Yeah, I'm not paying attention. It's not, the spike usually isn't a designation for a maximum. I believe it's a minimum in some cases. So if we go to Moose 20B, we got here.
We scroll up there,
yeah. Remainder of Fairbanks management area.
Spike
one bull with spike fork or greater.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is spike. So that's
now,
spike.
so that's either in this
or.
instance.
Yeah, you're correct.
You're not limited once it develops a small paddle. It doesn't have to reach any kind of distance.
It just has to be bigger than a spike or a fork.
Right.
Yep. Or at least a spike or a fork.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not an any bull hunt because an any bull hunt allows you to shoot a male calf with little nubs.
It does, I believe.
No, that's antlerless moose.
Yeah.
Well, and
it specifically said it does not
it
fall
does not
under
cover
the bull designation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now,
Well, there we
what
go.
you were talking about with the calves and the little nub, it doesn't fall under that. What the regulation for any bull, I believe, like I said, I think it's a 1-inch nub, and anybody can rip me apart if that's incorrect, but that's how it's been explained to me. It just has to have some form of headgear there.
Okay.
So the antlerless moose hunts and cow hunts and any moose hunts are typically going to be restricted to draws and some registration, subsistence, things like that. You're not typically going to look at those under a harvest ticket or anything like that.
There aren't many of those winter hunts.
Yeah.
And that being said, most of them are later on in the winter time.
I think 20F, we can verify this. I think 20F has something similar to that over the counter, but that's the only one I'm aware of.
Southwest, like west of the valley, out there across some of those rivers, they have antlerless moose permits in the wintertime.
Yeah.
A friend of mine actually just shot one last week under a permit like that. And I don't remember if it was, I didn't even ask if it was registration or harvest ticket or whatever it was, but it was an antlerless or any bull hunt, something to that effect. But
so you were about to go into the next antler restriction here.
So we've talked about spike fork, talked about width. And, one thing I wanted to say about width was there are a lot of great tools that can aid you in judging width. Probably, not probably. I know a lot of people that have used a trophy taker style of device to help judge the width of moose.
I saw that the new Leupold.
Correct.
The what is it? The 15i.
It's the 1500i.
1500i.
Okay.
Comes with one of those.
So that is how would I explain this? In your normal rangefinder, you have 2 bars that at whatever distance it determines that that object to be. It has those 2 bars that shows you what that width is at that distance, right?
And you can set that width whatever you want. So you can set it to 50, you could set it to 49. A lot of guys hunting deer, if they're looking for a specific width,
will set that,
or you can set it.
You can set it, yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that specifically that Leupold one actually can go very far out there. And what it does is it just determines the distance between those lines.
Right.
So
that's what I was just going to say. So it takes the range and then says, well, at 100 yards, these 2 bars are showing you 50 inches.
Yep.
Or at 200 yards, these bars now mean it's 100 inches. So anyway, but that's a really good tool. I know they stopped making those for a while, and now I believe that it's just recent that they reintroduced this trophy taker into their rangefinder.
What I believe happened with that was there was at one point they made some with it, and they didn't make a lot, and they were hard to get. And my dad had a buddy that worked really hard and spent a bunch of money and got one off of eBay or something. Because he wanted that, and it's a big rangefinder, like it's the size of a small pair of binoculars. This is the old one, and it worked. It's not lit reticle or anything like that, like you'd expect it to be. But my dad bought one years ago, and it was like the RX3 or the RX4, so it's a few years old, or maybe something like that.
Yeah.
And it had it in it. It was just there. It wasn't advertised as this huge thing, the trophy score system that you got to get. And so for a few years, or at least a year, it was in almost every model they made of hunting rangefinder. And then this latest iteration of rangefinders, it's only available in the 1500.
Oh,
the 1600 is a couple $100 more, but it's not there, which really kind of irritates me a little bit that I can't buy. Okay, so I get it. I have to have at least the 1500 to have that feature. You got to sell me your product. I got to pay a little more money for it. But if I want more range, say with the 1600 or the 2000, I'd like to still have the feature in my rangefinder.
And by more money, I want to say that particular model was going for like $420 or something like that. It's not a crazy amount. Yeah,
I don't believe it's even that much.
Is it not that much even? No. Okay, yeah, they're not crazy expensive.
I have the 1400i, and I bought like fancy old mossy oak camel pattern one, which would cost more money. It was like $230.
The old Rut Daniels pattern.
Yeah. I believe the 1500 is supposed to be around $300, $350.
Okay, that's even way
Nobody's
better.
had it in stock in town.
No, I've been looking
in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
So that being the case, that trophy taker rangefinder from Leupold, 1500i, you said. That's probably what I would steer somebody towards if they're looking to come up here, or if you already live in Alaska and you're planning on doing some moose hunting in an antler restricted area and you want to rely on width.
I have spent quite a bit of time behind one.
They work great, and I have yet to really encounter anybody that has had a bad experience with one that has shot a moose that said, oh yeah, my rangefinder let me down. It said it was, over 50 and it was, 49 or 48.
My one recommendation with this,
okay,
when using these and honestly any kind of range measuring device, right? Mm-hmm. Practice with it.
Oh yeah.
Don't just buy this thing off Amazon and go expect to be able to judge 50, 60-inch bulls out in the woods.
Take a piece of plywood and in your front yard.
Make sure you spray paint or duct tape or whatever it is. You know the measurement between these things that you can easily see from range, and get it in a place. Maybe you're from the Midwest like I am, and you can see Colorado from your backyard, or you can you can get a distance from it, and make sure it's accurate at 600 yards, 500 yards, 400 yards, whatever you plan on.
40 yards.
40 yards, whatever you plan on hunting.
I'm going to make a caveat real quick, and I'll say more on this later. You should not be using that as a tool, as a definite tool at a range of 4 or 5 or 600 yards.
Yeah.
It may be something you use to decide if you're going to keep looking or going further to close the gap, but I'll touch more on that in a little bit.
Yeah.
Yep.
So with that being said, the width measurement is probably the most difficult way to judge a moose.
It is, yep.
For people that haven't looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of moose, literally speaking, hundreds of bull moose, it's really tough to tell the difference between a 45-inch bull and a 50 or 53-inch bull.
Even if you have looked at
it's really
that
difficult.
Many moose, it is very difficult.
Very, very difficult. Because once they get past 45 or 47, 48 inches, they all look pretty big after that.
Yeah.
They all have big bodies by then. They all look like they're big, mature bulls.
Yeah.
If you're well under 40, it's pretty much obvious right off the bat. Even low 40s is pretty obvious. But once they get up into that over 40 class, over mid 40s, it gets pretty tough pretty quick.
Well, and
then you have to start. Sorry, go ahead.
Go for it. Finish your sentence.
I was just going to say then you have to start learning other characteristics, like using the width of the eyes apart to judge that, and be able to do it just with your own eye and take that width. Go look at some taxidermy. Go talk to a taxidermist and say, hey, if you measured 100 moose eyes, across from each other, what's that measurement? And then take that and use it as your judge. And I'm not even going to say the measurement that I've been told, because I don't want to steer anybody wrong. So for liability's sake, go talk to somebody about it and go look at that for yourself, get that number, and then learn how to do that in your head.
Yeah.
And then every single time you see a photo on Instagram or Facebook on one of these hunting pages, and you see a nice bull moose, during the hunt and before and after trophy photos and so on and so forth, measure it yourself, just using that gauge between the eyes, and figure out what you think it is, and then go look at how big it is and see how close you are. That's a good way to determine if you know what you're talking about.
Go walk around your local Sportsman's or Cabela's looking at racks. And
And one thing I was going to point out too is many people might not know this, is that moose will actually revert their size as they get older. And so if you're trying to just look and say, oh, well, that one's got a big body on it, it must be legal, they will grow to a certain point. And again, even the width is genetic. Certain moose will just get big faster. So you might be shooting a 5-year-old, might be shooting a 7-year-old, you might be shooting, but they will actually revert backwards. And as they get older and they're not able to get as much nutrition and put as much effort into growing those antlers, they will actually shrink. And so you could have a very, very old 30-inch moose. And so you really can't use, like you were saying, the body size or anything like that you might judge other animals off of.
Body size is definitely not the way to judge moose.
And they are very strict about the 50-inch rule when you're in one of these areas.
If you shoot one at 49 7/8,
it's getting taken away.
And in addition, so you had mentioned those. Another version of that you can get into, if you're knowledgeable enough and if you practice and if you do the math and you are proficient at this, again, that is the biggest thing. And I'm not going to recommend this to anybody that's not at a proficient level. But if you have an optic on your weapon that has windage turrets on it, or
windage turrets,
or not windage turret. Oh, everybody should have a windage turret.
Yeah.
Windage markers on your reticle there, or you are a user of the mills, then you can accurately depict what the distance is between those markers on your reticle at different ranges. Now, depending on your optic, you're going to have either a first focal plane or second focal plane. The difference is the way that the reticle grows as you zoom in and out. A second focal plane is going to appear bigger at, say, 16 power than it does 4 power. Whereas
first focal plane
is going to appear bigger because the distance between those two is staying the same. So that gives you a distinct advantage that you're able to calculate that distance once and know exactly what you're talking about, or exactly what you're looking at, no matter if you're looking at this thing from 40 yards at minimum power or 400 yards at maximum power.
Yeah.
You know that the distance of each one of those notches is so many MOA or so many inches, so many feet, whatever the distance may be. A second focal plane will look the same regardless of your magnification level. And most of those, if you look at the manufacturer, whether it's a Leupold or Night Force or Swarovski or anything like that, when you're looking at these manufacturers and you go to their website, they will give you the distances that you can get accurate measurements off of those. Most of them are going to be at full magnification. If you're one of these people that runs a very high powered scope, I know there's a Night Force out there that's a 3-32, I think.
Okay.
I want to say it's the NX8, or maybe it's 4. I don't know.
It's 32. It's 3
huge.
to something. It's 3 to 25, maybe.
It's 3 to 30 something.
Yeah.
Our friend Jeremy has one. And that one will actually give you, it is 32. That one will actually give you accurate measurements at 16 and 32. And so you can actually look up and see what the difference is.
Okay. Now, that being said, it's accurate measurements. Okay. Sorry. I'm going to backpedal a little bit. If you have a second focal plane scope, the subtension markers in your reticle are only full value. They're only accurate at full magnification.
Unless you have one of these. That's what I was just getting at.
No. Now, hold on. Hold on a second. They have, some of the Leupolds have had this too, with second focal plane, where the reticle doesn't grow or move at all, but they have indicators at different zoom powers, but that doesn't mean that they're the same subtension value. So if you're at like 16 power...
No, I was getting...
Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go for it now. You're already
Okay, but if you're at 16 power and your overall top power is 32, at 16 power, those lines are going to be worth, whatever. I was
going to correct you on that, but
okay, sorry about that. If you're at 16 power, then each line might represent, instead of 2 minutes of angle, it'll represent 4 minutes of angle.
Right, correct.
And then at full 32 power, then they are worth 2 minutes of angle per line.
Yes.
Now, with a first focal plane, your reticle will start small at low power. And oftentimes it's harder to see those subtension markers in your reticle.
Yes.
So you oftentimes have to be at higher power anyway, but you also have to know how to convert minutes of angle or milliradians to inches.
Yep.
So that you can accurately determine that. So process is zap the moose with a rangefinder, check the distance, and then look at your formula, minute of angle to inches, and then look in your scope, get up to full power if it's second focal plane. Or if it's first focal plane, get into zoom where you can fit the rack in the scope, and then you get your minute of angle measurement, and then you use your converter to inches, and then you can get that way.
Correct.
I have done that before.
Yeah. And it's a very popular method to use.
Yes.
But that's why I stress practice.
Yeah.
Do your research. Know your science. Know your measurements and your math. Because
this is not a math equation that you want to get wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's just two of the mechanical ways, I would say.
Right. Absolutely.
One thing like you had pointed out with the eyes, a lot of people will use either the skull, between the space between the ears. A lot of people do that. I know the measurement, but I guess you have a good point. I'm not going to give it out to you.
Yeah.
You can do a quick Google search if you want to. Or the other thing, the more common one that I've seen is the tips of the ears.
Mm-hmm.
And so the distance between the tip of the ear on one side and the tip of the ear on the other. If you happen to have a phone scope with you when you're on your hunt and you're able to kind of look at this thing and get it to give you, and that's the other hard thing about this, is you don't want this thing to be angled when you're trying to measure these antlers. You have to get a dead on forward or away view.
Right.
And so if you can manage to, say, hook up a phone scope on your
spotting
scope there and get a good quality image, you can actually kind of take that and physically ruler out, your different.
There's actually
now,
I don't remember what it's called, but there is an app that you can use that take a picture and then use it to help you with that instead of having to use pieces of grass or something.
My dad has that, and he said it actually worked really well.
He sent it to me, and I was going to go look it up.
Like these guys were talking about a few minutes ago, practice that.
Yes.
Look at different pictures.
Yes.
Go to your local Sportsman's or Bass Pro. Go to wherever you can see.
Go scouting and look at moose.
Go scouting. That's the best way, honestly.
If you can, yeah.
But yeah, don't take any of these methods as just solid foolproof ways. You have to do your own footwork in this venture.
And don't drive into a national park and pull out a rifle and point it at a bull moose and say, well, I'm just judging him. Now, that being said, I know we kind of went a roundabout way with width, but that's because that's the most that is the way to judge a moose with the most screw ups.
And that's it's where most people fall short. It's where most people screw up, and it's the one most people struggle with.
Exactly.
Honestly, when they're trying to figure it out, that's the one most people have questions about.
So that being said, there is a safer way to judge big moose.
There is,
for the legality's sake, and that is brow tines.
Brow tine.
And that is where what you were saying earlier about the length of a tine and does it count as a tine or does it not? Yeah. And that's where we clarified that earlier in the show, talking about what makes a tine versus just an antler bump.
Yep.
And so brow tines, if you go back up, excuse me, to page 30 and 31 of the regs, Mariah, if you can scroll back up there for me, it gives you a couple of diagrams where it will show moose brow tines. Is that
this is the next one?
Okay,
up. There you go.
Yeah, so that's page 30. And there's a little diagram that shows what a brow tine is. And it gives a description. It says, brow tine means a tine emerging from the first branch or brow palm on the main beam of a moose antler. The brow palm is separated from the main palm by a wide bay. A tine originating in or after this bay is not a brow tine. So if you look at the main beam of the moose antler as it comes off the head, you have a relatively straight section. On some bulls, you'll see it kind of drop off a little bit. Yep. That's kind of a genetic thing. And then it takes a curve. The top of the antler starts to curve up from there, and the bottom of the antler curves down, and then it kind of splits off and palmates, as it's called. Yeah. Okay. Well, that first little section on the bottom of the antler grows out at a perpendicular angle to the main beam coming out of the head. Okay. Yep. So imagine if you have your hands out in front of you up at elbow height and you have your fingers outstretched and your hands cupped. That's basically what the brow tines are.
Exactly how I explain it to people.
And so that section of antler is cut off by the boundary of your wrist on either side. Anything growing on the left or right side of your wrist that's not up on that cup is not a brow tine.
Now, the confusing part that can happen with these in some genetic makeups is that your brow tines at a certain age will look very small. And so they're going to be kind of close to the head, and they might only have one or two, but then these secondary tines that come off to the sides that are not, because if you look at a moose's paddle, it has these spikes that shoot out before it really starts to paddle and gets just the smaller spikes going up the outside rib of it. Those
are called eye guards?
It should say here.
It says bay separating palms,
not brow tine.
Not brow tine. So,
but that
I've heard a lot of guys call those eye guards,
right?
But,
and
anyway.
They will sometimes go in a more forward direction than you typically see, depending on the genetics of the area.
Sometimes you'll have one great big tine that sticks out further than everything else.
And so a lot of people will mistake those for brow tines. But as you said, if you would just imagine your hands, that's
Yep. If you hold your hands up at, if you turn your elbows up and if you hold your hands up at shoulder height, imagine that as your brow tines.
Yep.
Not your thumb.
Yes, correct. Not your thumb.
Not your thumb.
Anything growing outside of your four fingers on the left or right side of that brow paddle is not a brow tine. Mm-hmm. And so just for clarification, again, James, why don't you read the identifying a point or a tine, then talk about what entails a point or a tine for a brow tine legality.
Let's see, which section is that?
That's this little pink section here.
Oh, the little pink section.
Yeah.
All right. So a point or tine is an antler projection at least 1 inch long or longer than it is wide, with its width measured 1 inch or more from the tip. An antler point or tine originating with 2 inches from the base and less than 3 inches in length will not be constituted as a brow tine or point.
So
why do you gotta read on the air?
There are sorry, put you on the spot. There are restrictions to what even a brow tine is. So even if it is growing on the front of that, doesn't mean that it's necessarily a brow tine. If it's not long enough.
Which really kind of sets into thought, the fingers. Mm-hmm. Think of your fingers there. Like you're not looking, unless you've had some very, very unfortunate events in your life, they're not little nubs, and so, and I apologize if I just offended, but you're going to have four very distinct,
right. They need to be very distinct standalone points by themselves.
And so again, if you're doing what we're telling you to do, looking at moose, looking at pictures, going and actually finding moose to see, you'll see what we're talking about. Yeah. It's pretty obvious.
You'll figure it out pretty quick.
Yeah.
But that being said, this is a foolproof way. Knowing what a brow tine is, knowing how to count brow tines is a whole lot easier than trying to judge a moose between 48 and 52.
Yeah.
Because you're probably not going to do that.
And I know people that judge strictly on brow tines and they completely quit trying to measure 50.
Right, exactly. And then, obviously, if you've looked at any moose at all and you're familiar with moose as a species and a 65-inch plus bull moose steps out, you're going to know it.
But if you've never seen a moose before and that 35-incher walks out, you might think it's a 50 plus.
Right, exactly.
Because it's way bigger than the whitetail back home. So
counting brow tines on bulls that you're not sure about is the safest way to not get your moose taken away from you.
Yep.
So count brow tines.
I second that motion.
Yep. And I believe that covers pretty much everything as far as moose antlers go.
Correct.
I don't think there's any, you can scroll down a little bit if you want to, Mo, but I don't believe there's any other units that have specific things outside of that. Now you have a interesting story.
I do.
As far as moose
I'll
hunting
reference
goes.
most of everything we just talked about in this story. I mentioned this, I think it was like in episode 1 or 2. It was definitely episode 1, I believe.
Yeah.
Kind of told a quick story about shooting a sublegal bull moose. So if you listen to that, this isn't any surprise. If you haven't, well, go listen to it and then come back.
Or you just tell it again in this one.
Yeah, I'm going to tell it again. I think then I focused more on what to do if you make a mistake like that. On this one, I'm going to focus more on the mistake I made when hunting this particular bull moose. Starting out, really it started a couple days beforehand. I had been glassing some moose on a hillside across the river. And I crossed the river a lot to go hunt over in that area. And the two bulls I was looking at, one was smaller, one was bigger. And the one that was bigger, it was a couple miles away, but it was massive. If it was facing me, I could see its complete body between its paddles. When you can see that, you're looking at a huge bull. Anyway, and they would show up once in a while. And I decided I was going to go over after them. And I went over, sat in a spot where I'd be able to see where they were coming up out of the trees. One morning, it was 2 days after I had seen them, and didn't see them. And so I thought, well, there's a big kind of flat and rolling tundra area that I could go right around in. And I was like, I haven't ridden off this direction. I'm going to go right off this direction and just see if I can find some moose at a pond or something. You never know what you're going to run into, right? Mm-hmm. See some wolves, who knows? And so there's mountains off to my right, and I kind of head parallel with the mountains, and I'm 5 miles off the mountains or something like that. And but it's all very open rolling tundra. It just kind of goes up into the mountains, and there's multiple areas I can see up in between where the mountains are going up, and they go up fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And I start heading out, and I kind of make a straight line, and I start to curve, and I'm coming back along the edge of the mountains, kind of more rolling terrain, headed back towards where I needed to cross the river. And and I was on a wheeler, and I'm just kind of riding along, glassing up between the mountains, and I wasn't even glassing at this point. I just happened to look up, and I could very distinctly, in a clear spot on the side of with the draw going up in the mountains, there was bull moose sitting there. Mm-hmm. And I look over, and there's like 5 cows, and just like, well, there they are. It must be the moose. And I get closer, and I think at that point it was like 1,000 yards. I get closer and realize there's 3 bull moose sitting there. And I start really glassing. It's been some time. I had my binoculars, and I had a loophole trophy pulled spot rangefinder with the trophy taking feature in it, or I believe they call it the trophy score feature.
Okay.
And I got 1,000 yards. I think I rode my wheeler to like 800 yards.
Whoa.
And honestly, moose are not very skittish, especially in the open country.
Yeah, probably not in that area. But I've seen a lot of moose that hear a 4-wheeler at all and they disappear.
People ride that area a lot. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. Anyway. So I was 1,800 yards when I stopped my wheeler. I think, I may have been more like a mile when I first spotted them, when I think about it. Anyway, stopped my wheeler, and I was looking at my maps. There's a dry creek bed coming down the middle. I was like, I'm going to head to that. And so I did. I just took off on foot, walking pretty much straight towards them, stopping to look at them. They never, they barely even looked up at me. At this point of the day, it had been real foggy, misty, nasty, rainy in the morning. At this point of the day, it cleared up pretty good. And I could see them, and there was a little fog around here and there, but I'm walking. I get close into like 600 yards. I look at them. I'm like, this has got to be the same bulls, because there's 2. Well, there's 3, and I saw 2 big ones and a smaller one off the side. And like, this is 2 big ones and a small one, and the 2 big ones looked massive, and the small one looked not as big, wide, but not real paddled out. Mm-hmm. I didn't give him the time of day, really. Mm-hmm. Thinking back on it, especially after that, it may have had 4 brow tines. I just didn't even take the time to find out, because I was looking at these 2 other bulls that I thought were massive, because I was convinced they were the same ones I was looking at, and they very well may not have been. But I picked out the one that I thought was the biggest. I pulled out what we call it the trophy taker. I don't think that's the actual name for it, but that's what we call it. I pulled that out. I'm about 400 yards. And I pulled that out and look at it, and I was just using it in my hands. I didn't have a tripod or anything, and that would help a lot. But I couldn't get distinct, I couldn't hold it still enough, because it would look at me. I mean, I had to yell to get these things to look at me. And I hit the button, and I'm getting the bars I want to see, and it's like, I think, he's touching both sides, but I mean, I was shaking a little bit side to side. It's really hard to hold something that steady at that distance, especially when it's small and not in light. Right.
And I'm going to be upgrading a tripod setup, and that's something else that your friend Thomas mentioned that we need to talk about was tripods, and we will.
For sure.
But I didn't have a spotter or anything like that with me, which I didn't necessarily need for the kind of hunt I was doing. I was away from the base camp. But
just kind of a quick question here as we're going. I just thought of this. Do those trophy taker rangefinders have a little adapter to attach to a tripod in them?
That one did. It was a much bigger one. The newer ones,
I think it's just a rangefinder.
May or may not.
I don't know about the Leupold one. Yeah, I don't know.
So that was a Leupold, and Leupold's the only company that I think has actually done that.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
But the 1500, I'm not sure.
But you'd have to get like a little clamp head.
You might have to get a clamp head depending on the one you get. I'm not completely sure.
It's totally recommended, though.
100%. Yeah, if you can, especially if you're looking at a distance. Now, as I said earlier, and this is why I do not recommend using that as you're within 100 yards or even 200 yards. It's a fairly confident way to tell, especially if you take your time and get it to look at you straight on.
Right.
It's a fairly good way to make sure, especially if you use that and then you also try to do the math with how wide its ears are or something like that.
Yeah.
Again, redundancy.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Using a couple of those systems, it's great. At 400 yards, it's kind of maxing out the distance. I'm also trying to judge them through my binoculars and that. And, I convinced myself it's got to be big enough. It looks big enough. Everything I thought I knew, it was big enough.
Yep.
And I thought, like I said, in the back of my mind, it's going, got to be the same moose I've been looking at. The biggest one was massive.
Right.
I don't think they were the same moose. Anyhow, I'm 400 yards away. I start looking for a place, I'm on this dry creek bed, but it's too low. There's kind of a bank I'm trying to set up where I can get an angle, lay down, and get a prone shot at these moose. And, it may, probably because of me, the cows kind of take off over the ridge. And then the bulls decide to stand up and start walking, and they go walk over the ridge. And I look at my maps. I can see there's another draw on the right, kind of. I take off, booking it through, knee-high, I don't know what you call it, knee-high alders. You guys know what that's like. And I'm in my muck boots. Okay, I'm booking it. I couldn't believe I made the time I did. I cover like a half mile and just running to get around this back up in this other spot where there's a draw where like looks like the direction they're heading. I get to a spot. I can see that bull. I see one walk away, and I see him. He's walking very slowly. I drop, get my rifle down, bipod out. It was a flat area, perfect for the angle and everything. And at this point, I was done guessing. I mean, I didn't have any other shot, any other chance. This was it. And he was walking. He had just started taking a step when I pulled the trigger the first time at 400 yards. That bullet went right in behind his guts. Didn't damage any meat, but he stopped. And I thought, well, he's not falling over. So I racked around and put one through both lungs. 400 yards. That's not a long time for that bullet to get there, but long enough for if an animal's moving. Yeah. It's not necessarily going where you think it's going to go. But anyway, second bullet went right through the lungs. I think it may have hit a rib and stopped in the hide on the far side. That was a Barnes 165 TTSX out of a 300 short mag. I actually have that bullet. I was just looking at it the other day in my cabinet. Anyhow, and he went down. Did the whole just kind of buckled back down, front down. I felt ecstatic. My heart was racing from running. I just executed this amazing shot, especially having just run all this kind of stuff. I felt great. Right. I take off a bunch of gear because I'm sweating and set my gear down, pile it up, throw something orange on top, grab my rifle, throw it over my shoulder, and take off walking this time because it's steeper the rest of the way, and hike my way up to the bull. I get up to it, and as I'm getting closer to it, I just can tell it's not as big as I thought it was, and it's close. But it looked, and I'm going, man, this thing's not that big. And I get up to it. I've got a little tape I keep in my pack, so I pull the tape out, stretch it across, and everything I could do. I got 47 inches. I have never gone, and I don't know if I ever will go from such a feeling of elation and accomplishment to the deepest, darkest depths of despair. Yeah. Yeah. No kid. Yeah. The moose camp, been going there for years, and my dad was back in base camp, and so I've got to let him know what I did. Yeah. I happen to have, that's inReach to inReach messaging. I use that, and then I look at my phone, and sure enough, I'm up on a mountain. I got cell service, which I don't have most of the other area that I hunt out there unless I get up high. So I call the troopers and report, and that's mostly, I think I talked a lot about that. If you make a mistake, if you shoot one too small, first of all, don't. But if it happens, don't wait around. First chance you get, report yourself. If you do that, get that meat to them, take care of the meat, get it to them. That was a $320 fine. Yeah, it was a slap on the wrist. Yep. And
didn't get to keep the moose.
No, I didn't get to keep the moose. I had to turn it in.
But you didn't get a charge.
The biggest regret I have from that. No, I wouldn't do it again, but I don't really wish I hadn't done it. If you know what I mean. At this point, I learned a lot. And the biggest thing is I've been judged for a long time. And I'm not that old, but I've been hunting up and hunting moose my whole life, and I've been judged for several years a lot, and looking at a lot of moose that were too small, and I knew they were too small, and I just wasn't going to take the risk. And there was a couple times I know I've seen them. Yeah, I can tell you, I know there's ones that were definitely big enough. I just never was able to close the gap on like I needed to. And but this one, I needed to, if I had taken a little bit more time, hadn't rushed it, if it was the moose I had seen before, which I don't believe it was, it means I'm probably going to see it again. Right. It's not worth.
How long had you been hunting at that point when you saw these? Was that like towards the end, or?
I believe it was towards the middle.
It was the middle.
So I said it was 2 days. And the reason it was 2 days was because we saw him the next day. My uncle was up visiting, and we went up there to hunt specifically for those ones we had seen. And the day after that, he had headed out of camp. He had to leave, and so I was like, "Well, I'm going to go see if I can get him myself." Yeah. And Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, but no, so I didn't use, I didn't use the phone scope thing. I didn't have really anything to use that with.
Yeah.
One thing on my list is a lightweight tripod and a phone scope adapter, even if it goes on my binos for that situation. I'd like to get a small spotting scope for that kind of hunt.
Yeah.
For when I'm hunting off my wheeler alone, because I love to do that.
Yeah.
But make sure it's big enough. And you know what? Biggest mistake I made was not stopping and counting the brow tines on that one that may have been big enough and just shooting that one. Because unless those bulls were so big that there was no doubt that they were 50 plus or 60 or 70 inches, then I shouldn't have even been looking at them. If I had to guess, I should have just shot. The body on that thing was huge.
Yeah.
And I have one picture of that moose. I wish, my biggest regret, not taking pictures with it.
Right.
I took a picture of it as more of a, well, here's proof I shot it. I guess I should have a picture of it. I felt horrible. I felt sick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not really in a trophy picture taking mood at that point.
If you had just bought a brand new truck you'd been saving for, you just bought, for me, it'd probably be a brand new Duramax if it was a dream pickup, right? Okay, I'd go get that brand new Duramax. It'd be limited out with everything. And then on my way home, I totaled it.
Yeah.
Would you want to take a picture of that?
No.
That's how I felt. I mean, it was like that, if not worse, and so I didn't. But anyway, yeah, I would say if you do shoot something too small, take some pictures. You'll be glad you did later. It'll help you tell the story.
But the reason I asked about the time is because there's two periods of time when a moose just seems to magically grow, and one is with a very young hunter, not young in age but young in experience, trying to look at these animals and judge them for the first time. And two is towards those last couple days of the hunt.
Yeah, it wasn't the last couple days of the hunt. It was just more. I had rushed the decision to decide it was big enough.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even necessarily convincing. It was convincing myself, obviously, because I wanted to shoot a bigger moose.
Right.
But at the same time, I had convinced myself it was big enough without taking the time to judgment. And I tell you, I'm not going to do that again.
Right.
Yep. But
all right. Well,
and so just make sure when you're out there, you're taking your time. You're doing your due diligence. It's a very serious thing. You can go out there and spend 10 days wheeling around looking for a moose and end up thinking you took one, but not actually getting any meat in the freezer. So
right.
But I think we've covered moose pretty well. And again, if you do end up breaking any of these regulations, fess up to it, man. Don't be one of those people that tries to hide it or tries to cover it up or anything like that. Call the troopers the first chance you get. Just turn the animal in, and there's no guarantee they're going to show any leniency. I mean, that's obviously their job is to enforce the rules and to enforce the laws. But the cops here in Alaska, especially the wildlife cops, they're people.
Yeah.
And they live here and they hunt here too, and they understand that sometimes it can be hard, and especially if it was done in ignorance. They're not a bad group of people to talk to. So
if you show them respect, they will show you respect.
Yeah.
Now, if you've been a total idiot, you got 3 dead illegal moose there that you don't have tagged for.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They're not gonna show you respect because you've broken the law completely.
Yeah.
But if you do your best, if you make a mistake that you don't even realize you've made, and it's a small mistake, call you about it, or they walk up to your camp and discover it.
Yeah.
And you admit it to it, and you say, "Yep, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry." They're going to be as lenient as they can with you.
Yeah. And again, they're people. Don't be afraid to reach out to them.
Yep.
So, but on that, we're going to move on to the next biggest ticket item that people come up here to go after, and that would be the Dall sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And you've taken a Dall sheep yourself. You've guided Dall sheep hunts from Dalton there. So, why don't you go ahead and take this one away?
Well, let's go ahead and turn to the Alaska Reg book page. Let's see here. Page 33 talks about identifying a legal ram. And I know we already mentioned this in episode 10. We talked about sublegal sheep harvest, so I'm a little bit redundant here, but forgive me. And we'll go ahead and read the definition of a full curl ram.
Real quick, the thing is, it's not bad to be redundant on something this important.
That's right.
I mean,
yeah.
So,
Yep. So it says a full curl ram whose tip of at least one horn has grown through 360 degrees of a circle described by the outer surface of the horn as viewed from the side, figure 1. And it has a little sketch there showing the different stages of maturity on adult sheep.
Mm-hmm.
The next point says a ram with the tips of both horns broken, which means the lamb tip is completely absent. Horn tips that are chipped or cracked are not considered broken if any portion of the lamb tip is present. So those are ways that, okay. I was just going to say that those are ways that you can determine the legality of dull sheep. So basically, has to be full curl, broomed off on at least one side, or it has to be at least 8 years old.
Now, before you dive off any farther, one thing we didn't actually get into with the episode 10 and the sublegal sheep harvest was something that I think maybe an inexperienced hunter wouldn't understand is what constitutes a lamb tip. When you're saying a lamb tip, what does that?
Oh, yeah, we mentioned it a lot. But
we mentioned it a lot.
Define it.
We didn't define it. So
okay. So one more thing that I was going to say before we move on to that is when it comes to broomed horns, which means the lamb tip is completely absent. In the first bullet point, it says, with the full curl regulation, it says whose tip of at least one horn has grown through 360 degrees of a circle, and so on and so forth. So if it's full curl, then it has to be just one side. Okay, the other one can be less than full curl or just partially broken off.
Just like
the
brow
moose,
tines
right?
on a moose.
Correct.
Yeah.
When it comes to being broomed, it says a ram with the tips of both horns broken. So if you see a ram that is broomed on one side, but is not full curl on the other, and he still has part of his lamb tip, and you shoot that ram, and he's not 8 years old, it's a sublegal sheep.
Yep.
So I don't know if I completely clarified that in our episode 10 talking about sublegal sheep harvest, but that's just,
I want to say you did.
That's just good clarity to say it.
Yeah.
I said, we're being a little bit redundant here, but it's a very important species to judge, and it's probably the hardest animal to judge, arguably the most difficult animal in North America as far as the hierarchy and importance of hunts like this.
Yeah.
Sheep is, the utmost highest of pedestals of hunt. That is the ultimate goal for a lot of mountain hunters is to shoot a sheep. So anyway, it's very important that you know the legalities and that you know and understand if it's full curl, it'll have to be full curl on one side. But if it's broomed, it's got to be broomed on both sides. If you're not counting age and if you're not counting full curl, it has to be broomed on both sides. Now, broomed means the entire lamb tip is completely absent on both sides. That being said, a lamb tip, if you look on the insides of a set of sheep horns, I know in episode 10 we talked about becoming obsessed with sheep hunting and things of that nature. When you are interested in it and learning everything you can about sheep, you need to start looking at a lot of sheep. There are some good YouTube videos out there showing what a lamb tip is. The best way that I can describe it is there is a little bit of a groove on the inside of the lamb tip, kind of an indentation on that lamb tip that stops, and there's a little bit of a bulge ring there.
Okay.
Just a ever so slight of a point there. And it's difficult to see that in the field unless you're really close enough to tell. It's not uncommon for people to mistake a lamb tip for being completely gone if a ram has split one side and not the other. That can become pretty difficult to judge.
Now, if you scroll over, Mo, I believe that the regulations here do give lamb tip characteristics.
They do, right here.
Yeah. So, we can go ahead and read through some of these. A length of less than 4 inches. The inside surface of the lamb tip is distinctly concave. So that's that little groove I was talking about.
Yep.
When compared to the remainder of the horn. The lamb tip is the section of a horn grown during the first 6 months of a sheep's life and is the section of horn distal of the first annulus, which is the swelling of the horn that forms during the first winter of life. So that's that little bulge at the end of the lamb tip, or I guess it's at the base of the lamb tip. So that's what a ram grows in the first 6 months he's alive. So you'll hear some people refer to a ram as 8.5 or 9.5 and so on and so forth. Some people count the lamb tip as a half year just for technicality's sake.
Yeah.
They don't count that when they age the ram. They count full-on annuli. So that does not count as a 6-month period. So
interesting. And that's good information to know.
And that being said, it really wouldn't be to your benefit anyway, because if it's 7, then it's 7 years, 6 months. Right. If it's 8, then it's legal. It doesn't have to be 8 years, 6 months, right? So those characteristics are important, and then for determining whether or not a ram is broomed. Okay.
Yeah.
Now the next thing that it talks about the legality of a ram. The next bullet point is a ram at least 8 years old. It means to be legal. This other criteria is it has to be at least 8 years old, as determined by counting annual horn rings and segments. It says reference figure 3. If a ram's horns are not legal based on degree of curl or broken tips, you are responsible for counting at least 8 true annuli, emphasis on true, before attempting to take the ram. It is difficult and ill-advised to age a ram in the field by only counting horn rings because of false annuli and narrow horn segments on older rams.
Yeah. There
are a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of debate amongst very experienced sheep hunters that'll shoot a ram that they think is 10 or 11 or 12 years old, and they bring it into a biologist, and he says, no, he's 9 or 10.
Yeah.
You know, that's not going to matter when you're in front of a biologist getting him sealed.
Right.
And he says, nope, he's 7. And you thought for sure he was 8, 9, or 10, or, you know, whatever that may be. Now, there are a lot of other ways to help you get an idea. Okay. Like we were talking about moose. If you've looked at hundreds and hundreds of bull moose and a 60-inch moose steps out, you know, that moose, yep, he's 100% legal. I'd shoot him with my eyes closed, type of thing. You know,
your dad showed me a moose he was looking at.
Yeah,
and I looked at. He showed me a picture of it, and then he showed me a picture of it looking dead on, and I said, "That's a 60-inch bull." It was just like I had no doubt.
Yeah,
on the size of that moose.
Yep, exactly. So that being said, the same thing applies with sheep hunting. There are certain characteristics and genetics that are very visible in a sheep's horns and how they grow and the mass that they carry, how low they drop or how high they go, depending on where they live. Yeah, and I'm not going to get into all the genetic specific areas and the different mountain ranges that show different genetic characteristics, but that is a thing that good sheep hunters understand. And even from a distance, not even being able to get close enough to count rings per se, just off the characteristics of it, you can tell through a spotter, yeah, that one's worth getting a closer look at, because look at how well he carries his mass all the way through. He's very likely an old ram because of how much mass there is. Or look at how low he drops, and he comes way back up there, almost to full curl. So if I get closer and I put the spotter on him and I find out, sure enough, you know, he's 11, 12-year-old ram, and he's huge, but he barely made full curl. Just a couple of years ago, and there are a couple of photos out there. Actually, the Alaska Super Draw, I think, is going on right now. That Super 7 raffle. The photos that are in the sheep segment, there's a ram that I'm particularly thinking of that was taken, and there is a photo of the hunter with it. And this ram, I believe, was 12 years old, if not older. And it was barely full curl, but the horns dropped to below the jawline and then back up to full curl on both sides. And the mass that it carried was just, I mean, like baseball bats all the way through. It was incredibly heavy. And a ram like that a year prior might not have been full curl.
Right.
Now, he was legal age-wise, and you would have been able to tell that. And I actually know some information about that ram that I won't get into, but I'll just say this. He was passed on at least once in his life when he was of age, but he wasn't full curl. And the outfit decided to let him live another year or two and let him grow a little bit more to make him more appealing, if you will, and really a better trophy because they knew he had more life left in him. But that being said, some sheep, some genetics areas, these rams don't get big twister, typical Alaska range style where they're more of a tighter curl, but they'll either go wide or they'll just corkscrew.
Yeah.
And that's where you get that really iconic Dall sheep look. And it's just that slang term is just corkscrew, that they go a curl and a quarter or a curl and a half sometimes, and it looks ridiculously good.
Yeah.
But a lot of times those types of rams don't have that great mass because to get that length, they sacrifice mass for overall length and character in the horn.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different, there are a lot of different regional specific characteristics that you can encounter with sheep hunting, but the full curl law and the 8 years old, judging off of annuli, if you know how to do that, and again, there are good videos out there from Wild Sheep Foundation talking about judging a ram off of annuli and what is a true ring, what is actually an annuli, and what is a false ring, and how that can come back to bite you.
Yeah.
So that being said, anyway,
I was going to point out, there's, like with moose, you kind of run into the same thing. But different regions have different genetics, and those different genetics will create either a longer antler or a wider antler,
skinny paddles,
crab
claw brow tines.
I've even seen some where the brow tines will hang down almost in front of their eyes.
Interesting.
And it looks kind of funky and wonky. But with sheep, to my knowledge, and I'm not a sheep hunter, but aspiring, you are, so I'll run this by you. The regulations for full curl 8-year-old broomed off are universal across the state, correct?
Correct.
Regardless of the fact that there's different genetics and different ranges, that does not create a new set of regulations for this animal.
Now, that there are a couple of hunts that you can draw in Alaska that are any ram.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
But there is no middle ground. It's either you can shoot any ram, and I believe, to my knowledge, I only know of one hunt in particular that's even allowed, and it's an archery sheep hunt down south in the Chugach Mountains.
I know which one you're talking about.
And I thought I had heard about any ram hunts somewhere else, and you know what? Now that I think about it, there might be a couple different permits that you can get for that,
but it's one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. It's either any ram or full curl regulation, and full curl regulation means full curl, double broomed, or 8 years old or older off of annuli. So
gotcha.
That's the legality on sheep.
What would your go-to methods be for judging a sheep of this caliber? Say you are looking at full curl, and you want to go through all the verification methods. I know you went through a couple in episode 10, but
But so judging a full curl ram, you want a dead level plain look from a profile perspective. You want that. So okay, here's a good way of imagining it. Okay. If you lay a stick across the front of a ram's forehead, level at the base of where the horns come out of the head, okay? If you lay a stick across the bottom of those bases, the tips of those horns, one of those tips has to break that plane on at least one side. That's what they call the stick test.
You use your reticle for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you can do that from the front. From the side, and again, this is perspective. If you're dead level with him, and a tip comes up past the base of that horn, then that's full curl. Okay. A lot of people make the mistake of looking at a ram from underneath.
Right.
And they get the wrong perspective where it looks like that tip breaks that plane because of your angle that you're trying to look at it. And they shoot the ram, and he's just under full curl.
Yeah.
A lot of times, if you think, man, this ram is definitely full curl, and you're a couple 100 feet, if not more, underneath of him, if he looks obviously past full curl there, he might be pretty close, but you need to be level with him, or wait till he turns his head down and gives you that better look, or he looks down towards you and gives you that frontal stick test look, if you will.
Does it matter if his head is up, down?
Yes.
With the frontal one?
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I can't really think of any way of judging rams outside of for the full curl way. The ideal situation is for you to have a level look at him, whether it's from the front or the side or the back, whatever it is. Level is best. Okay. When it comes to broomed, you need to be able to be close enough that you can pick up what the lamb tip looks like, if it's there or not. If you can see down to that bulge, if there's tip left there, you have to be able to distinguish that through your glass. Now, number one, you need to have a really good spotting scope to do something like that. If you're going to be counting rings or looking for a broomed ram, unless he's like way broomed off and he's got like big nub ends on his horns, that's very obvious that he's broomed way back. It can be difficult to judge if a ram is a little bit broomed or if the lamb tip is totally gone or if he's split, like I mentioned earlier. Some sheep, you'll see some rams that are so obviously broomed, it looks like they're, it looks like they grew weird because the horns come down and they'll be broken off or rubbed off at 3/4 length. And it might be an ancient old ram that, he just rubbed on rocks and wore his horns off. And there are a lot of speculations as to why certain rams do that. I'm not going to dive off into all those reasons, but in an ideal world, for a full curl test, whether it's the stick test from the frontal view or a side profile view, for getting that full circle, if you will. Now, it's not a circle because not all rams grow in a perfect circle. Very few do. Okay.
Yeah, the picture in the regs makes it look like they do.
There are a lot of complaints about how it used to be, and the only view that Fish and Game would give you was that view of a full curl ram.
Right.
And a lot of beginners got confused by that.
Kind of the wrong impression. I guess.
Because they would see a ram and his tips would come out and forward and up and break that plane, but he wasn't, a 360 degree circle. So that the tips didn't come up and then come back. So that's basically full curl regulation
that kind of
summarized.
falls back into know what you're looking at. Know the animal you're chasing.
Yep. I do have one more thing about full curl regulation that I need to look up and verify. So if you had something else that you wanted to talk about just for a second, I definitely want to revisit this and bring up one more thing, but I have to verify it first. So
So the next animal on our list that we wanted to talk about here, and we'll circle back to sheep in the midst of this, but was goats. Now, goats, there are...
He's the greatest of all time.
Well done, sir. It's a very... I'm not going to call it similar, but it's a very mountainous hunt as well. And there's not as many regulations as far as goats go, as far as horns that they grow, that you have a restriction on. To my knowledge, the only restrictions on goats necessarily is certain areas restrictions on billies versus nannies. Now, you're going to find that across the state with a couple of different species. One we're going to talk about here soon is caribou. And with these two, really the only thing you're going to necessarily have to pay attention to and learn, which can be harder than you might think, is understanding the difference between a billy and a nanny or a bull and a cow caribou.
Yep.
I'm going to talk, I guess I could jump ahead and talk about caribou because that's more what I have a lot more familiarity with. But when you're looking at hunts all across the state, you're looking at registration hunts and harvest ticket hunts. And again, you have to go into your regulations pamphlet there and look across the board there. Typically speaking, your regulation hunts are going to be whatever they feel is the appropriate setup for that year. And this year was actually a weird one because with the 40-mile herd, they did kind of a mix, I guess. So they had a total quota that was any caribou. but I believe this year it was after 250 cows were shot, they were going to make it bull only. And so they kind of merged those two, whereas typically you'll see it blatantly in the regulations as far as which one's which. That being said, it's kind of... It's not as difficult to tell the difference as you might think to an experienced eye, but typically the biggest things you're going to look for are obviously the genitalia. You know, with a lot of these ungulates, it's pretty easy to tell.
Right.
You can either see the vulva, you can see the sheath underneath. Those are going to be things, but again, you have to get the correct angle on this animal, and they're not always going to present you with the proper angle to see anything like that. What is that outside?
It is. It's outside the room. I hope it won't be in the audio here.
Okay. Sorry guys, there's a loud noise going on. But with caribou specifically, one thing I've found is that when you're looking for big bulls, it's pretty easy to pick them out from the cows.
Yeah.
Not that the cows don't have good antlers on them, but a cow's antlers tend to be, and this is just in my experience, I guess the word I'm looking for is more spindly. You know, you're not going to see, if you're looking at a bull and it's got this huge shovel off on the front of his face and the antlers are as thick as your wrist and they're really, really dense, chances are that's a bull. Now, I wouldn't recommend using that as a method of figuring it out, but the chances are good. That is a situation where if you're going to see it from a ways off and you're going to trying to determine if it's worth going those 2 miles or something like that off your original path to go investigate this thing, that's going to be a good indicator. Most of the cows I've seen, and I have seen some big ones, but most of them seem to have the thinner antlers. They just kind of, they'll still get some of that width or even some of the height, but they're they look more like twigs, they're just not.
If you see a massive bull, at least this is the way I feel about it. When I see a massive bull caribou, and he's the leader of a herd or one of the leaders of a herd, there's no question, just based upon his antlers.
Yeah, you can tell there is a definitive difference. But again, especially to the inexperienced eye, I would not recommend utilizing that.
And the 40-mile hunt is, I've never seen, personally, my experience on hunting the 40-mile hunt. Dalton, I believe you shot a big bull.
Yeah, I've shot a couple of decent ones. Yeah,
he usually goes a bit further out when he's able to do that. But a lot of the road hunting and stuff that's done, you usually don't see. A lot of times the cows are bigger than the bulls in those areas.
And I know of several very large bulls that have come out of that country. But yeah, typically that herd does not support the giants you're going to see in these other videos and other pictures. But along with that, so that's a good way to judge if it's even one you should move in on to begin with and investigate farther. Another thing is there's the rump patch as well that you can use. Now, the rump patch on a male is going to be thinner than that of a female, typically speaking. I'm talking about the white patch on the back there. Similar, to many other things in this world, on the back of a woman is just typically bigger. So, so, you can kind of use that too to gauge. I mean, even if it does have fairly large antlers, if it turns away from you and walks away and that patch is going, almost to the outsides of the hind legs there, you're going to realize pretty quickly that that's not something you should investigate farther.
Now, depending on the restriction while you're hunting, a lot of these hunts are either bull or cow.
That is true. All over the state, you're going to find any caribou.
Also, just to kind of piggyback off what Mariah just said, most of the non-resident opportunities are going to be bull only.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that is true.
I'm a resident, and I don't spend a ton of time looking at non-resident
I know that's
regulations,
generally true for the 40 mile, and for what I know of, a lot of caribou hunting for non-residents is going to be bull only. From what I've read, and it's been a while since I've touched up on that. But
the only exception I could see to that is possibly a draw. Yeah, they might be able to draw in any caribou, but I'm not sure.
And then
on that.
Also, I didn't quite catch. Sorry, I was looking at the sheep pamphlet. When you introduced this. Obviously, bull caribou do shed their antlers in the wintertime.
Yes.
So This is especially important if you're winter hunting caribou.
Oh, yeah, true.
And the bulls have dropped their antlers. And if it happens to be a bull-only restriction, and there's a chance that some of the bulls have already lost their headgear, this is where you really need to be paying attention. So in that particular event, you do need to be able to distinguish because, and this will make it easier in some instances, if you're in the situation where it is a bull-only harvest and it's a winter hunt
in late December,
then it's pretty easy to tell because most of the bulls will have lost their headgear, but not all of them. And from what I have noticed, I've seen smaller bulls that retain headgear longer than the big bulls do. And I'm not going to pretend like I understand all of that. But that does make it more difficult to distinguish a small bull from a normal cow.
Yeah,
and from what I've been told, and this might be totally wrong, but I had it explained to me this way. Cows keep their antlers longer throughout the winter before they drop them to help them dig through the snow and find food because a lot of the cows are pregnant throughout the wintertime. So that aids them in being able to get through the snow and get proper nutrition.
I think it also helps them defend from predators as well a little bit more than it kind of makes the bulls a little bit of an easier target for the wolves. But
right. Okay. But anyway, I just want to make sure that we covered that. But
and through the different periods, there's going to be a lot of different.
Yeah. So for right here, this is unit 26. And for residents, there is bull and cow opportunity under 26A. And then non-residents is one bull. So it is bull only up north too.
I was thinking if there was a unit that would have
either or,
it'd probably be 26.
I was thinking the same thing.
So I went and looked, and even here,
because up north is the most opportunity for caribou for anybody.
26A remainder 5 bulls per day for resident.
Right.
And a decent amount of the year.
5 bulls per day?
Yeah.
Oh, my.
And that's July 1st to July 15th. But if you hunt on July 16th to October 15th, you can just shoot 5 caribou per day.
Oh, my.
And that's per resident.
Right.
Non-resident, one bull.
Yeah. One bull.
And we kind of covered that in the last episode.
Live in Alaska, people.
Now that's a fly-in location.
Or no, I'm sorry. Don't come to Alaska.
Please visit and get your one bull.
That's a fly-in location.
And hire a guide.
Hire a guide. Yeah. But that's kind of throws back to the last episode where we talked about really the big difference between resident and non-resident in these regulations is typically going to be mostly just your restriction.
With that being said, then, normally a non-resident then doesn't have to worry about distinguishing between a bull and a cow because in the fall, even if you're doing a DIY hunt, you're probably looking for a bigger animal overall.
That's true.
You're probably looking for an animal with bigger headgear. Cows don't get big antlers like bulls do. Not even close.
We kind of,
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I wasn't totally on step with you there, but.
Yep. Yeah. And I will follow back. I wouldn't use that as your deciding factor, but it is very true. You're going to be able to tell the difference pretty much instantaneously with these things.
Did we cover the Capra species? Goats?
We kind of touched on it, but I figured I'd save that for when you were back from your little adventure.
More about goats than we do.
Your little adventure into the interwebs.
Okay. Well, have we
can fall back.
Have we covered caribou?
Honestly, I think we have because caribou aren't that hard to judge. Like I said, there's no 50-inch regulation. There's no curling. There's no anything like that. It's just male versus female. And so once you, and again, if you go to the regs, what page was that, Mo?
This
can you
137, 138.
No, the one with the...
I believe that was like 39 or 29.
If you go into the Alaska regulations book and you're curious about this, I would recommend going to see
29.
Obviously a lot better pictures, but they do have a diagram on what makes a bull versus a cow.
I think they have a little pamphlet too about it.
I think they do. If you would go in, So if you're able to go in person, they have it's a huge shelf of extra material in addition to the regs. That's going to be very helpful.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
But anyway, we'll dive back into the goats now. So,
right. But just before we do that, I had one more thing that I wanted to talk about with sheep, and that there was one detail that I really wanted to not omit. So I looked up the Alaska Department of Fish and Game has a little pamphlet out And if you just look up Doll Sheep Guide to Judging Sheep Horns under the Full Curl Regulation, Fish and Game has a little pamphlet that comes up in my PDF as dated for 2016. And on page, let's see here, page 6, topic 3, the title is The Horn Base / Tip Angle Test. And I'm just going to quickly read through this. It's not very long. Sheep horns can grow through 360 degrees of a circle without reaching the plane of the horn base. These horns usually drop low and wide and curl tightly as the ram ages. In the example at right, there's a photo there. The horn base angle is assigned a relative starting point of 0 degrees. As you measure the angle around the horn, it is obvious that the tip of the horn on this sheep surpasses the 360-degree angle required for it to be full curl. Basically, what that means is if the ram's tip of the horn does not come up and pass the stick test and does not come up to surpass the level of the base of the horns to meet full curl on that criteria, if it doesn't come up that high and it dips real low, like I was talking about earlier with that one ram from the photo, if the tips are at an equal or greater degree than the base of the horn is at, then that is also full curl. So and for our listeners, you can't see what I'm doing here, but I have my hands outstretched and making a gesture here. But if the tips of the horns come up low, if that genetic drops very, very low, and it's one of these rams that might not ever make full curl by coming up to break that plane of full curl, if those tips are grown back at an angle that is equal to or greater than the base, then that is also full curl legal. Now, it says here, the contact, I'm sorry, I'm going to go ahead and read this. When determining the direction of the horn tip using a straight edge, as in the picture below, your contact point with the horn will be 1/2 inch from the tip, measuring down the inside or outside center of the horn, not the circumference. At this point, you can draw a line across the horn or use a rubber band to mark the spot to place your perpendicular straight edge. The horn, the last 1/2 inch, has to be at an equal to or greater than angle than the bases go at.
Okay.
You follow me?
Okay.
So that also counts as full curl. So even if his tips only come up to here and not all the way up past his bases, if they're down low, but they're pointed back at an equal to or greater than angle of the bases, then that's also full curl.
The start of the bases?
Correct.
Okay.
So that's another way. And that's a really good clarification to make.
Yeah.
Because if you're only ever judging rams on the full curl of the tips have to come up and surpass the bases, or if they have to come up and pass the stick test, then there are a whole lot of sheep that are going to die of old age.
Yeah.
Because they're never going to make full curl either of those first two ways, but they'll make full curl by the degree of the tip.
Okay. So there's not varying regulations, but they have kind of accounted for some of these genetic issues that people run into in certain areas. Okay. That's good to know.
Anyway, enough about sheep. We were talking about goats next, correct?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, we covered caribou. That finishes up sheep. So, yeah, goats are next.
All right. Goats.
So, and again,
the king of the mountain.
The king of the mountain. They are, again, and I think I touched on this a bit, but they're pretty similar to caribou as far as the regs go, that you basically only have to determine between male and female, depending on the hunting area that you're in.
Right. Yes. As far as I know, I'm not aware of any horn restriction.
I have never heard of
goats.
that.
I've never heard of it.
And I looked in the regs and didn't see it.
Right.
Yeah.
So goats are determined for legality by Billy or Nanny. And now goats in Alaska, we don't have goats in the interior. There are goats in South Central and out in the islands. Down in Southeast, out in the ABC Islands, Kodiak, and then down around Juneau, and then Kodiak Unit 8 has goats as well. There are an abundance of goats on Kodiak. It's a very popular hunting destination for mountain goats in Alaska. Typically, a big billy goat starts at about 10 inches. That's like the upper echelon of trophy class. From what I understand, I haven't personally shot a goat. I haven't got any goat hunts yet. I haven't really gotten into goat hunting just yet. I've I've intended to multiple times, and so I've spent a lot of time studying it, and I've looked at a lot of different goats in different hunting places out on the coast that I've been for various species. And so I've spent enough time looking at them that I'm pretty confident in being able to judge between a billy and a nanny, but I'm not where I would want to be necessarily to judge from a great distance.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of goat hunters make a mistake. Is a lot of it is with body characteristics that you can determine the difference between a billy and a nanny. Now, there is a significant size difference and build type, if you will, between a big billy and a nanny. And if you've never seen goats before, a big, well-haired nanny looks pretty big and masculine.
Yeah.
I mean, they're big, strong, muscular animals. They are incredibly tough animals. I have multiple stories about people that I know of and people that I know personally that have shot goats, and they've taken multiple shots to put these goats down.
Yeah.
And for that reason, some guys that I know choose to take, neck shots and just try to spine them. Goats are suicidal when you shoot them. There are plenty of videos on the internet that you can watch guys shoot goats in the lungs, and they say, all right, well, bonsai, and they go run off the cliff and literally just go jump off a cliff, which makes it extremely difficult to recover them.
And I've seen videos and heard stories about recoveries of just that, and it mangles the living crap out of them, man. I mean, just the, I mean, I've heard stories of basically the hide just completely slipping off because it's already separated by the time it got to the bottom. The horns are just completely broken apart. The meat's all done.
And while that can happen with sheep as well, it's not as common. Sheep don't live in as nasty stuff as goats do, generally speaking.
Yep.
Goat hunting, you're going to generally put on fewer miles overall for goat hunting, but they're going to be, ice axe and crampon miles. It's very, very steep.
Yeah.
You're going oftentimes from sea to summit, from sea level up to however many thousand feet that you need to get to at these goats. And it's very steep, cliffy, brushy terrain up until you break out of the tree line. Goat hunting is very tough.
Yeah.
Very, very tough. It's hard work. So anyway, billies and nannies, there's a lot of good information out there about billies and nannies and the distinguishing of them. The distance of the horns at the bases is a good way to tell. The degree of the angle. That billies will oftentimes have shorter and more straight horns and thicker.
Yep.
And nannies will tend to have longer horns that kind of sweep back more.
Okay.
And they'll tend to splay out more to the side. And again, we're talking about a game of literally inches here. Judging goats is really difficult to do from any kind of distance. You need to be within a few hundred yards to do it well. A lot of guides that I know that are very successful goat guides recommend getting in within a few hundred yards before you even consider shooting one. And at a few hundred yards, you're breaking out the spotter to start doing your judging then. Because that's where you can really zoom in and see that fine detail and really distinguish, okay, what's the distance between the horns at the base? How much space is there? And you can see kind of the mass that it carries all the way up through. You can see if they sweep back or not. You can see if they kind of splay out to the sides or not. And all these characteristics that are compared to sheep, a lot more minuscule things to look at compared to, sorry, I'm spacing out here. A big set of sheep horns.
Right.
So it's just a lot more difficult to do. Body size is generally the easiest way. If you have a big mature billy and there's nannies around, he'll stick out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
But if you have a bunch of billies together and you're trying to choose the biggest billy, that's, you can get into some technicalities there. But
now, would you say it's similar? Like, we'll get into bears next, but would you say it's similar to like a boar versus a sow, where you can kind of see where the weight sits?
From what I've seen of goats compared to bears, I see some similarities there with body judging, and the same like with a 60-inch moose. When he steps out, you just know it. Yeah, that's a billy.
Yeah.
Or that's a big 10-foot brown bear. You just know. But it really helps if that 10-foot brown bear has a 7.5-foot sow with him, because he literally looks 2.5 times her size. Literally looks 2.5 times her size. It looks like a Volkswagen Bug next to an F-350 with a 6-inch lift. It literally looks like that. I have so many photos on my phone of monstrous brown bears standing next to big sows that if you saw that sow by herself, you might think, oh, that's a decent looking mature bear, and you'd be able to tell it was a sow just from the characteristics of it. But as soon as that big boar steps out, it gives it perspective, and that perspective is also what you can look for with these goats. And if you have a big billy say on the side of the mountain next to a bunch of nannies, you'll know it.
Yep.
But anyway, Fish and Game has a really good pamphlet about that. They have a YouTube video. I believe it's on YouTube. I know you have to watch a video on Billy or Nanny.
Oh, do you?
In order to get...
It's similar for like a brown bear registration hunt.
Right. And at least the times that I have gotten a goat registration permit in going into an area expecting to goat hunt, you have to watch that video and check the box, yes, I've watched the video, Billy or Nanny, because in a lot of places, if it's Billy only, you're not allowed to shoot a nanny. But in a lot of other places, like in Southeast, if it is Billy or Nanny, there's a small quota for that particular pocket. And so what they'll do is they'll say, all right, the biologist will say, so for this area, let's just throw out a number, 20 square miles. This pocket of goats can sustain 2 billies and 1 nanny harvested this year. And if somebody shoots a nanny, the hunt closes immediately. Even if no billies were shot, if you shoot a nanny, the hunt closes. If they leave, and I don't know if they ever do this, I would assume that they close it, but if in the event that someone had shot a nanny and they left it open, and there were only 2 billies left to shoot, legally speaking, it's your responsibility to check that quota and call that biologist for that area, or look online and see what has been shot and what is left to be shot legally. And if you were to go in there and shoot another nanny, then, that could be an infraction. I don't think they leave those open, though. Every time I've seen in Southeast, where I've looked at goat hunting before, every time I've seen a nanny shot on that record, they close it down for that reason, because I assume they don't trust hunters enough to make that decision when it counts the most. Which, it sounds kind of terrible, but usually most of those goat hunters, I see those particular zones is what they call them for goats. That they break them up into zones throughout those mountain pockets. And generally speaking, the hunters know enough and they're educated enough and they're responsible enough to take the time and only shoot billies. So for the most part, they shoot 1 or 2 billies and the hunt closes. But if someone does shoot a nanny in a zone like that, then they will close it down.
And I know they do a similar thing with the caribou, because even with the fall hunt for this year was bull only for the 40-mile hunt.
Right.
And I was talking to somebody where they expressed that they were expecting a certain number of cows to be shot regardless of the bull only, just because of...
They count that into it.
They enough people have done it over the years that they just kind of assume it's going to be a thing.
Especially on the 40-mile hunt.
You get a bunch of yahoos off the Steese Highway. And
it's got antlers. It must be a bull.
And so I could see that happening. And anywhere that they do have hunts like this, where after a certain number are taken, they're going to shut it down, or the rules are subject to change throughout the course of the hunt. Fish and Game is very good about providing a way for you to find that information out. And if you're going to be hunting in one of these areas and chasing one of these animals that is in that grouping where, like you said, I mean, if one nanny is shot, they're going to be...
Gets closed down.
They're going to be closing down.
Yep.
There's going to be a hotline or I'm totally drawing a blank too, a database or something like that that they will set up for you to check. And it is your responsibility to check in there. They're not going to be putting out a PSA or anything like that. And so, but so just making sure you're doing that, because there's a lot of hunts in Alaska that do have those kinds of regulations.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But that pretty much, there were 2 other things I wanted to cover, but man, we are
pushing. I think it was maybe our longest yet.
I think we were planning on talking about bears in this one, but
I wanted to go over bears, and then methods not allowed.
I would say with bears, we could easily cover an hour just with bears.
Yeah, so I've spent enough time bear hunting, and so has Mariah, and now you, that we have enough content to talk about bears for an entire episode easily, and then talk about method of take.
Yeah. So keep an eye out for that one. That'll be dropping at some point.
I did want to say,
sure. Is this Mo's bonus segment? Or?
No, not today. Too long of a podcast for that. I was going to say, though, on your goat hunt, when you're carrying your rifle, you need to protect your glass. And the best way to do that is with the Stealthy Hunter rifle cover.
That's correct.
Words.
And right, yeah.
Word.
And you can find that on Stealthy Hunter's website. Easiest way to get there is to go to thenorthernhunter.com, and we have a big banner. If you scroll down a little bit there, that says Stealthy Hunter. And when you purchase that rifle cover, use the code TheNorthernHunter to get a discount. He's got some other great products on there as well. We've talked about some of them before, and you can check those out.
You know, the great thing I love about that one particularly, I know we've talked about it before, but it does cover the action as well.
Yeah, I love it.
So honestly, if you're going on a moose hunt and you're wheelering around, you know, when you've got it on the front of your rig there, and some people, if you're in an area where you can shoot off of the trail that you're on, you might not want to do this, but I've been on some muddy trails, man. You don't want to get that grit and that little silt and sand and everything like that.
Your definition of muddy trail one of these.
I look forward to that.
Now, I do have one more thing to add, and this is just totally hypothetically, but wouldn't you think that anybody on any hunt anywhere in the world should have a Stealthy Hunter rifle cover?
I would think so.
Absolutely.
I mean, every animal we've covered today: moose, caribou, Dall sheep, mountain goat, bears, deer.
If you were able to still fox hunt in England from the back of your horse,
you should have a Stealthy Hunter rifle cover, man,
on your shotgun. Yes.
And to run back to what I was saying with shooting off your wheeler, this thing actually gets put on and off very quickly.
Yeah.
So you would, I mean, as long as it's not a 3-second shot opportunity, which you probably shouldn't take anyway. Yeah. You know, you're able to get that thing off pretty dang quick. So
Dalton and I spent some time in the snow doing some calling this last weekend. We didn't have any success, but that's no big surprise around here. He just had I think a scope cover or something he was using. Yeah. But I love that thing, and depending on, I had a couple rifles with me, so depending on where we were sitting, what we were doing, depending on which rifle I grabbed, but on my bigger rifle, I had that thing and I loved it. I was like, man, I need two of these.
Got
so I
that
can
nice
put one on each rifle.
on there.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's got the barrel cover on it, which is great because in the snow. And
absolutely.
I just don't have to worry about any of it.
And if you're going to be going after sheep and goat, you're going to be hiking a lot. Yeah. So make sure you check out some supplements that'll help you out with your joints that are going to be hurting. So they have Stealthy Nutrition as well.
That's right. Something to check out for everybody. But go check out Ryan's website. We'd appreciate it. And use the code TheNorthernHunter at checkout for a discount code. It helps support the show, help support Ryan Lampers, and we appreciate that very much.
All right. Well, you gentlemen have any final thoughts?
Hunt smart, hunt safe.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you like the show, like us, follow this show, share it with your friends, and make sure you contact us on our website, www.thenorthernhunter.com. And even if you don't like it, send it to your friends.
Whether you liked it or not, give us 5 stars, please. Really use it. And
hit us up on our socials, follow the show, and
if you have any questions or ideas for future comments or episodes, then write us in, and we would love to talk about it.
Yeah. All right. Thomas sent us a real long episode, and we covered a couple things, and I think we might just have to tick away at that one.
That might be a 2 episode. But all right, guys, we'll appreciate it. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, have a good one.